On the family trip to a resort, my daughter-in-law humiliated me in the lobby. We canceled the old lady's room. She deserves to sleep in the dumpster. Everyone laughed at me. I just walked to the front desk and showed a golden card. When the manager recognized me, everyone went pale. I'm so glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment what city you're watching me from. That way I can see how far my story has reached. I am 61 years old, and I never imagined that the worst moment of my life would happen in front of strangers in the lobby of a luxury resort. We had been driving for almost 4 hours. My son David was at the wheel, his wife Fiona in the passenger seat, and I was in the back with my 2 grandchildren. I had been waiting for this trip for months. Months. Ever since David casually mentioned on a phone call that they were going to the Mountain Crest Resort for spring break, something in my chest lit up with a hope I should have immediately smothered. Fiona said there was room for me. Well, what she actually said was, "I guess your mother can come if she really wants to," with that tone I knew so well. That tone that turned every invitation into a concession, every gesture into a favor I didn't deserve. But I accepted. Of course, I accepted. During the drive, Fiona complained about the traffic, the heat, the radio station David had chosen. When one of the kids asked if we could stop for a bathroom break, she sighed as if they had asked her to climb a mountain. "It's only 30 more minutes," she said with irritation. David said nothing. He never said anything. I stared out the window trying to get excited, trying to convince myself that this time would be different, that maybe, just maybe, we could be a real family for a few days. The Mountain Crest Resort appeared before us like something out of a magazine. White stone walls, impeccable gardens, a huge fountain at the main entrance. The parking lot was full of expensive cars. Mercedes, BMWs, a few Teslas here and there. David parked our sedan among them, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt like part of something special. We walked into the lobby, and the air conditioning hit me like a blessing after the heat of the car. The place was even more impressive inside. Soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, so polished you could see your reflection. There were elegant families lining up at the front desk, employees moving with quiet efficiency. The soft murmur of conversations mixed with instrumental background music. I stayed back while David and Fiona approached the counter. The kids ran towards a decorative fountain near the waiting area. I held my small roller bag, suddenly feeling out of place in my simple floral dress and my comfortable shoes. Fiona spoke with the receptionist, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a perfect bun. I watched her check something on the computer, watched Fiona nod, watched David sign papers. Everything seemed to be going well. Normal. Routine. Then Fiona turned towards me. There was something in her expression, a kind of glint in her eye that I recognized immediately. It was the same look she had when she was about to make one of her innocent comments, the kind that always sounded like jokes but left marks that lasted for days. She walked towards me with deliberate steps, her heels clicking against the marble. The lobby was full of people, families waiting their turn, bellhops carrying luggage, guests sitting comfortably on the leather sofas, and Fiona raised her voice. She didn't shout, but she spoke loudly enough for everyone to turn. "We canceled your room, Beatrice." I froze. The words didn't make sense at first. I waited for David to say something, to correct her, to explain that there was a mistake. But he just stared at the floor, his hands in his pockets. Fiona continued, and her voice grew louder, clearer. "We're not going to waste money on a room for you. You can sleep in the dumpster. It's what you deserve after all." Ah, laughter. I heard laughter. Not from everyone, but from some. An older man in a cashmere sweater let out a choked laugh. A younger woman whispered something to her partner, and they both smirked. Even the receptionist looked down uncomfortably, as if witnessing this was part of her job. My son, my only son, the boy I raised, who I fed, who I held when he had nightmares, laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a nervous, soft chuckle, but I heard it. And that was worse than any roar of laughter. The kids didn't understand what was happening. The older one, 9 years old, looked at me, confused. "Is Grandma going to sleep with us?" he asked. Fiona pulled him by the arm. "Hush, sweetie. The grown-ups are talking." I felt a heat. first in my chest, then rising up my neck to my cheeks. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was something deeper. A mixture of humiliation, betrayal, a pain so sharp it was hard to breathe. The lights from the chandelier seemed too bright. The murmur of conversations became a distant buzz. My legs were shaking. For a second, I considered turning around and leaving, just walking out, calling a taxi, going back to the bus station, disappearing from their lives as they clearly wanted. But something inside me changed in that instant. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was clarity. For years I had tolerated Fiona's comments, the small cruelties, the convenient oversights when it came to inviting me to family events, the Christmases where there wasn't room in the car to pick me up, the kids' birthdays where the invitation arrived a day after the event. And my son, my David, never said anything. He never defended me. He always found an excuse, a justification, a way to downplay what his wife was doing, and I allowed it because they were my family, because I didn't want to cause trouble, because I was afraid of losing them completely. But in that moment, standing in the middle of that luxurious lobby, with strangers looking at me with pity or amusement, I realized something. I had already lost them. A long time ago. I took a deep breath. My hands stopped trembling. I adjusted the handle of my suitcase and walked towards the front desk. I didn't look at Fiona. I didn't look at David. I walked with my back straight, with firm steps, even though I felt like I was falling apart inside. The receptionist looked at me with a cautious expression. "Ma'am, can I help you?" I took a card out of my purse. It wasn't a normal credit card. It was gold, heavy, with a particular gleam under the lobby lights. I placed it on the marble counter without a word. The receptionist picked it up. Her eyes went wide. She looked at the card, then at me, then back at the card. Her fingers trembled slightly as she swiped it through the reader. "Mrs. Whitmore," she whispered. Her face went pale. "We didn't know you would be here. I apologize. We had no record of your arrival." Behind me, the silence was absolute. I could feel the stares fixed on my back. The receptionist typed quickly on her computer, her movements nervous. "One moment, please. I'm going to call the general manager immediately." And then he arrived. A man in an impeccable suit with perfectly combed gray hair walked quickly from a side office. His expression went from professional to almost reverent when his eyes landed on me. "Mrs. Whitmore," his voice resonated in the lobby. He approached with hurried steps. "We had no idea you would be gracing us with your presence. Your name is on the list of the resort's owners, but..." The world seemed to stop. Owners. I heard a choked gasp behind me. I knew who it was. The manager continued speaking, but I could barely focus on his words. Something about the presidential suite, about special arrangements, about how the staff would be at my disposal. My heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from a strange mix of relief and sadness. I turned around slowly. David was pale. Completely pale. His mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to speak, but the words were stuck in his throat. Fiona, on the other hand, had her face frozen in an expression of pure shock. Her green eyes, normally so calculating, now reflected something I had never seen in her. Fear. The kids were pulling on their father's sleeve, asking questions he couldn't answer. The people who moments before had been laughing were now watching us with an uncomfortable curiosity. Some muttered among themselves. Others just stared, waiting to see what would happen next. "Mrs. Whitmore," the manager touched my arm gently. "Would you like us to take your luggage to your suite immediately? We have champagne waiting, and the chef can prepare whatever you desire for dinner." I nodded silently. I still didn't trust my voice. "Perfect. And your companions?" He looked at David and Fiona with a neutral, professional expression, but there was something in his eyes. Recognition. He had witnessed the entire scene. "They have their own reservation," I said finally. My voice came out firmer than I expected. "They will not be traveling with me." The manager nodded. "Of course. If you need anything at all, just dial 0 from your room." He motioned to a young bellhop. "Please escort Mrs. Whitmore to the presidential suite." As the bellhop took my suitcase, David stepped forward. "Mom, we need to talk." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a 37-year-old man, not the boy he had been. I saw the fine lines around his eyes, the start of gray at his temples, the slightly stooped posture of someone carrying an invisible weight. But more than anything, I saw a stranger. Someone who looked like my son but had stopped being him a long time ago. Not now, David. But Mom, I don't understand. How could you? Why did you never tell us? Later, I said, and followed the bellhop towards the elevators. The presidential suite was on the 15th floor. The bellhop made polite conversation during the ride up, mentioning the amenities, the restaurant hours, the location of the spa. I nodded without really listening. My mind was somewhere else, in another time. When the suite door closed behind me, I could finally breathe. The room was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the mountains, elegant furniture, a full kitchen, even a grand piano in the corner. There were fresh flowers in crystal vases, a bottle of champagne on ice as the manager had promised, and gourmet chocolates on the coffee table. I sank into the blue velvet sofa and closed my eyes. The truth was more complicated than anyone imagined. 15 years ago, when my husband Richard died, he left me more than anyone knew. Richard had been a quiet, hard-working man, the kind of person who went unnoticed in a crowd. We had lived modestly, never showing off, never drawing attention, but Richard had been smart with investments. Very smart. When he died, I discovered we had nearly $2 million in various assets, properties, stocks, bonds, and this resort, Mountain Crest, had been one of his last investments. He had bought a 30% stake when the place was under construction, betting that it would become a successful luxury destination. He was right. After his death, I had decisions to make. David was 22 then, just out of college, full of ideas about how to help me manage the finances. He and Fiona had only been dating for 6 months, but she was already there, in every conversation, every family meeting, offering suggestions. I remember one afternoon in particular. We were sitting at the kitchen table of my old house, going over documents. David had that serious expression he put on when he wanted to seem adult. "Mom, I think you should let me handle this. It's complicated. I don't want you to get stressed or make any mistakes." Mistakes. As if I were incapable. As if 40 years of marriage and running a household hadn't taught me anything about money. Fiona was next to him, nodding with a concerned expression. "It's a lot to process, Beatrice. David just wants to take care of you. Maybe it would be better if he handled the accounts, the investments. You could just rest, enjoy your pension." Pension. As if I were an invalid old woman. But I nodded. I let them believe they would. I showed them a few accounts, a few documents, just enough to satisfy them. And I kept the rest for myself. The biggest investments, the properties, the business stakes, including this resort. Why did I do it? At first, I didn't know. There was something in the way they spoke to me, the way they assumed my incompetence, that made me want to protect what Richard and I had built. Then, as months and then years went by, it became something else. It became a test. I wanted to see who they really were when they thought I had nothing to offer them but my presence. I wanted to know if they loved me as a mother or if they just tolerated me as an obligation. The answer came slowly, painfully. David and Fiona got married a year after Richard's death. They didn't ask for my help with the wedding. Fiona said her parents would handle everything. I assumed it was because they wanted to control the details. Years later, a cousin casually mentioned that Fiona had said it wasn't worth asking Beatrice for money because she was barely scraping by on her pension. My pension, which they assumed was all I had. When the kids were born, I tried to be present. I offered to babysit, to help, to be the grandmother I wanted to be. But there were always excuses. Fiona was busy with her routine. The kids had too many activities. It wasn't a good time for a visit. At Christmas, they would invite me, but always with that tone. "I guess you can come if you don't have other plans." As if it were a favor. As if my presence were a burden they endured out of obligation. And the birthdays. God, the birthdays. David never forgot Fiona's. Flowers, fancy dinners, expensive gifts. My 60th birthday. Last year, it passed without a single call. When I finally called 3 days later, David said, "Sorry, Mom. With work, it completely slipped my mind." Fiona had had her surprise party 2 weeks earlier. 40 guests, live music, a 3-tiered cake. I swallowed the pain, again and again. But somewhere inside me, a part had recorded every slight, every forgotten date, every time they chose to exclude me. And that part had grown, solidifying into something cold and clear. This wasn't my family, it was my failed test. The phone in the suite rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I ignored it. It rang 3 more times before stopping. Then my cell phone started vibrating. David. I ignored the call. Then another, and another. Finally, a text message arrived. Mom, please, we need to talk. We're at the restaurant in the lobby. We'll wait for you. I looked at the message for a long time. Then, slowly, I typed a reply. I'll see you at the restaurant at 7. Just you and Fiona. The children need to stay with the hotel's babysitting service. Dinner was in 2 hours. I took a long shower, letting the hot water loosen the tension in my shoulders. I put on a dress I had bought months ago but never worn. It was elegant, a deep navy blue, with a cut that fit me better than I remembered. I did my hair. I put on a little makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. I saw a woman who wasn't apologizing for existing. I went down to the restaurant at exactly 7 o'clock. The place was beautiful, with dim lighting, candles on every table, the soft clinking of glasses and silverware. I saw David and Fiona at a corner table. He looked agitated, swirling his wine glass in nervous circles. She had that expression I knew well: forced control, tight lips, hands on the table, fingers laced together too tightly. I sat across from them without a word. A waiter appeared immediately, filling my water glass, offering the menu. I ordered without looking at it, keeping my eyes on my son. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, David broke it. Mom, why did you never tell us? I took a sip of water before answering. Tell you what exactly? That you own this place. That you have money. All this time, we thought you were barely getting by on Dad's pension. I never said that, I replied calmly. You assumed it. Fiona leaned forward, her voice controlled but tense. You made us look like fools out there, in front of all those people. I looked directly at her. For the first time in 15 years, I looked at her without looking away. No, I said softly. You made yourselves look like exactly what you are. Fiona recoiled as if I had slapped her. David opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The waiter arrived with our appetizers, placing them carefully before silently retreating. No one touched their plate. I don't understand you, David said finally, his voice trembling. If you had money, if you had all this, why did you let us think? That I was poor? I finished for him. That I was a burden? That I needed your pity? I picked up my fork, cutting a piece of salmon with precise movements, because I wanted to see something. See what? Fiona practically spat the words. I chewed slowly, savoring the food they hadn't even touched. I wanted to see if you loved me without expecting anything in return. I wanted to know if I was worth anything to you beyond what I could give you. David shook his head, confused. Mom, we've always loved you. Always. The words would have moved me years ago. Now they just sounded hollow. Really? I said softly. Like when you left me out of Christmas dinner 3 years ago because there wasn't room in the car? I checked later. You rented a 7-person van. There were 5 of you. Oh, David blinked. There was a mix-up with the rental. Or like my 60th birthday last year? I continued, my voice still calm, almost conversational. Not a call, not a text. But 2 weeks before, you spent $5,000 on Fiona's surprise party. I called you later, David protested weakly. I apologized. 3 days later, after I called first, I took a sip of wine. And your apology was that you were busy with work. End quote. Fiona leaned forward, her eyes bright with barely contained anger. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a resentful child, keeping score of every little mistake. Little mistake? I repeated. I set my fork down on the plate with a soft click. Fiona, in 15 years, you have invited me to your house exactly 11 times. I counted. And of those 11 times, 6 were because you needed me to watch the kids while you went out. That's not fair, David said. We live busy lives, Mom. We have responsibilities. I know, I nodded. That's why I never complained. That's why I always said yes when you needed something. I took care of the kids when they had the flu, and you had that important conference. Remember, David? I was up for 3 nights straight. When you came back, you didn't even ask how they had been. You just said thanks and went to sleep. The silence fell over the table again. I could see David processing, remembering. His face tightened with each memory. Or when your washing machine broke, I continued, looking at Fiona. I offered you money to fix it. You said you didn't need charity from anyone. But 2 weeks later, you asked David to buy you a new one. He took the money from his emergency fund. $3,000. Fiona's lips tightened. We didn't know you could. Exactly, I interrupted. You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed I was poor, that I was a nuisance, that my only function was to be available when you needed me, and disappear when you didn't. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd made since he was a boy when he was overwhelmed. Mom, if you had just told us. What? My voice rose for the first time. Not much, but enough for nearby tables to glance over. I lowered it. If I had told you I had money, would you have treated me differently? Does that make this better or worse, David? He didn't answer. I took another sip of wine, feeling its warmth go down my throat. When your father died, you two came to the house every week. Remember? You helped me with the paperwork, with the bank calls, with everything. I paused. But as soon as you thought everything was settled, as soon as you assumed I had just a basic pension and nothing more to offer, the visits became less frequent. First every 2 weeks, then once a month, then only on holidays, and then not even that. We had the kids, Fiona protested. We had a life to build. I know, I nodded. And I never asked to be the center of your life. I only asked not to be completely forgotten. David took a deep breath, his eyes glassy. Mom, I didn't realize. I didn't know you felt that way. You didn't? I looked at him directly. Not once did you notice your wife talking about me as if I were a burden? Not once did you wonder why your mother was spending every holiday alone. He was silent. I looked at Fiona. Last Christmas, your sister posted pictures of your family dinner on Facebook. I saw all of you. 20 people around that enormous table. David's family. Your family. Friends. I was a 15-minute drive away. I ate a turkey sandwich in front of the television. You told us you had other plans, Fiona said defensively. I lied. Because I knew the invitation was out of obligation, not because you actually wanted me there. I placed my napkin on the table. And the truth, Fiona, is that I preferred being alone to enduring another dinner where you'd treat me like a piece of furniture. That's unfair, she hissed. I have always been nice to you. Nice. I let out a humorless laugh. Fiona, you told your mother I was hard to please. I heard you. I was in the bathroom at your house during Thanksgiving 2 years ago. You were in the kitchen. You said I was critical, demanding, that I always found something to complain about. Fiona paled slightly. I have never complained. Not about the food, not about how you raise your children, not about anything. But you needed to paint me as the villain, to justify how you treated me. I stood up from the table. So no, it wasn't me who made you look like fools this afternoon. You did that all by yourselves. Wait. David stood up too. You can't just leave. We have to fix this. There's nothing to fix, David. You showed me who you are. For 15 years. And I finally believe you. So what? Fiona stood, her voice shrill. Are you going to punish us? Disinherit us? Was this all just to humiliate us? I looked at her with a mix of pity and exhaustion. No, Fiona, I'm not going to punish you. I don't need to. You're already living with the consequences of your choices. I'm just refusing to live with them anymore. Mom, please. David reached me, taking my arm. His touch was soft, almost pleading. Give me a chance to fix this. Just tell me what to do. I looked at him. I saw tears in his eyes. I saw genuine regret on his face. But I also saw something else. I saw a 37-year-old man who had just realized his mother had money and that he had wasted years of potential benefits. I don't want you to fix anything, I said softly, pulling my arm free. I just want you to leave me alone. I returned to my suite with a heavy heart but a clear mind. The room phone started ringing 20 minutes later. I unplugged it. My cell phone vibrated constantly with messages. I silenced them all. I poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar and went out onto the balcony. The nighttime view of the mountains was breathtaking. Twinkling lights from distant houses, stars shining in a clear sky, the cool air filling my lungs. For the first time in 15 years, I felt light. The next morning, I went down to the restaurant early. I ordered breakfast, enjoyed fresh coffee, and toast with homemade jam. I read the newspaper an employee politely brought me. It was almost normal, almost peaceful, until David showed up. He looked terrible, puffy eyes, wrinkled clothes, as if he hadn't slept. He sat across from me without asking. "I didn't sleep at all last night," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I was thinking, remembering. And you're right, Mom. About everything." I kept eating my breakfast. "Fiona and I fought. Hard. She says you're overreacting, that you're being manipulative. But He ran his hands over his face. I started remembering things. Things I had ignored. Things I let slide because it was easier than confronting Fiona. I took a sip of coffee. And I realized I've been a bad son." His voice broke. "The worst son." "Yes," I said simply. "You have been." He seemed surprised by my direct honesty. "But David," I continued, setting down my cup, "I didn't come here looking for an apology. I didn't come here for you to finally see what you've done. I came because Fiona invited me. And, foolishly, I thought maybe things would be different." "They can be," he said quickly. "We can change. I can change." "Why?" I asked. "Because now you know I have money? Because you realize there might be an inheritance to lose?" "No," he protested, but there was doubt in his eyes. "Because you're my mother. I've always been your mother, David. That didn't change yesterday. What changed was your perception of what I can offer you." He was quiet, unable to deny it. I stood up from the table, leaving enough cash to cover the bill, even though I knew I didn't need to. "I'm going home tomorrow. You two can stay for the rest of the week. It's paid for. Consider it my last gift as a mother." "Last?" His voice trembled. "Mom, you can't be serious." "Completely serious." I slung my purse over my shoulder. "I don't want your money back or your empty apologies. I just want peace. And that peace doesn't include continuing to be treated like a second-class citizen in my own family." I left him sitting there, his head in his hands. But I knew it wasn't over. It's never that simple with family. I spent the rest of the morning at the resort spa. I got a massage, a facial, and sat in the sauna, letting the heat draw out years of accumulated tension. The staff treated me with a deference that would have once made me uncomfortable, but now I simply accepted it. I was an owner of this place. I had invested my money wisely when others assumed I couldn't do anything but cook and clean. I was in the relaxation lounge, wrapped in a soft robe and sipping herbal tea, when one of the spa employees approached with an uncomfortable expression. "Mrs. Whitmore, excuse the interruption. There's a rather insistent lady at the front desk asking for you. She says she's family." I sighed. "Tell her I'm not available." The employee nodded and left. I closed my eyes, trying to reclaim some of the peace I had felt moments before. But 5 minutes later, my cell phone started ringing. It was a local number I didn't recognize. I answered out of pure curiosity. "Hello? Beatrice?" It was Fiona. "Of course." "I'm in the lobby. We need to talk. Now." "I'm busy." "I don't care what you're busy with. Come down immediately, or I'm coming up myself." Something in her tone, that air of authority she had always used with me, sparked something inside me. "If you try to come up to my suite, I will call security." Silence on the other end. Then, in a more controlled but still tense voice, "Please, just 5 minutes." I considered hanging up. But there was something different in her voice. This wasn't the bossy, confident Fiona I knew. There was a hint of desperation. "The sitting area next to the lobby. 5 minutes. Not one more." And Crete. I dressed without rushing, taking my time. If Fiona was going to demand my presence, she could wait. I went down 15 minutes later. I found her sitting rigidly on one of the leather sofas, her hands clasped in her lap. When she saw me, she stood up immediately. She wasn't wearing her usual perfect makeup. Her eyes were red. Her hair wasn't so impeccably styled. She looked human, vulnerable. I sat across from her without a word. "You're destroying my marriage," she said abruptly. I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not doing anything. Your marriage is destroying itself." David didn't sleep last night. He was up, looking at old photos, reading old messages. He's realized. She bit her lip. He's realized things. That you manipulated him into pushing me away. That you built a narrative where I was the problem mother-in-law to justify your cruelty. I kept my voice neutral. "Yes, I imagine realizing that must be uncomfortable." Ender 12. "It wasn't like that," she protested, but without conviction. "I just wanted us to be our own family without interference." Interference. I repeated the word slowly. "Fiona, in 15 years I've seen you maybe 30 times. If that's interference, I don't know what absence is." She wrung her hands. "You're right, I know. I've been horrible to you. But you have to understand, my own mother was controlling, always meddling in my life, in my marriage. When David and I got married, I swore I wouldn't let that happen. So you assumed I would be the same." "Yes," she said it so quietly I barely heard her. "And every time you tried to get closer, I saw it as an invasion, as control. So I pushed you away. And David," she paused, "David let me, because he trusted me, because I made him believe I was doing it for us." It was the most honest confession I had ever heard from her. But it came too late. Far too late. "And now what, Fiona? You've come to apologize because David has finally opened his eyes? Or because you realize there's money you could have been enjoying all these years?" Her face contorted. "It's not about the money." "Isn't it?" I leaned forward. "Because just yesterday you said you canceled my room. You sent me to the dumpster. Did you do that out of family love?" Tears began to roll down her cheeks. I was angry. God, I don't know. I was annoyed that David insisted you come. Because once again, we had to put up with his mother. And in my head, you were this figure who represented everything I didn't want to be. A meddling, needy, demanding mother-in-law. I was never any of those things. "I know." She sobbed openly now. "I know, and David is throwing it all in my face. He's going over every moment, every excuse I made not to invite you. He yelled at me last night. He told me I'm cruel, that I'm manipulative, that I've become my mother." She covered her face with her hands. "And he's right. Watching Fiona break like this should have given me satisfaction. I should have felt vindicated, but I just felt tired. Fiona, I didn't come here to destroy your marriage. I came because, foolishly, I still had hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could be a family. But what you did yesterday, in front of all those people, only confirmed what I already knew. I am not welcome in your life. And I probably never was." End of tree. "I can change," she said desperately. "I can be better. Just give me a chance." "A chance for what? To pretend you appreciate me? To invite me to awkward dinners where we all pretend the last 15 years didn't happen?" I shook my head. "No, Fiona, I don't want that." "Then what do you want?" Her voice was pleading. "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. I want you to leave me alone." The words came out colder than I intended. "I want you and David to live your life, raise your children, and forget about me. Because that's what you've been doing anyway. Only now we're making it official." She stood up abruptly. "You can't be serious. The kids need you. David needs you. The children don't know me. And David?" I paused. "David made his choice a long time ago. He chose his comfort over my well-being. He chose your version of reality over the truth. And now that the truth is out, I can't just pretend that doesn't matter." Fiona wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You're his mother. Mothers are supposed to forgive." "Supposed to?" I looked at her with a mix of disbelief and sadness. "Fiona, I have spent 15 years forgiving every forgotten date, every slight, every small humiliation. Forgiveness isn't infinite. And mine ran out yesterday when you told me I deserved to sleep in a dumpster." End of. She stood there, trembling. Then, in a small voice, she asked, "What are we going to tell the children?" That's not my problem. I stood up. But if you want my advice, tell them the truth. Tell them their grandmother tried to be a part of their lives, but their mother wouldn't let her. And when they finally had a chance to be a real family, you chose to publicly humiliate her. Will that make them hate me? Possibly. But it's better they hate the truth than love a lie. Emser. I started to walk away, but her voice stopped me. Beatrice. I half turned. You're right. About everything. And I'm sorry. I am so sorry for how I treated you. I'm sorry I wasted 15 years. And I'm sorry it's too late to fix it. Her voice broke again. But for what it's worth, I truly am sorry. I looked at her for a long moment. I saw genuine regret in her eyes. I saw a woman facing the consequences of years of casual cruelty. And for a second, just 1 second, I considered giving in. But then I remembered. I remembered every Christmas alone, every forgotten birthday, every poisonous comment disguised as a joke. And I remembered yesterday, standing in that lobby, feeling the humiliation burn my skin while my own family laughed. I know, I said finally, but sorry doesn't undo the damage, and it certainly doesn't rebuild 15 years of broken trust. I left her there, crying on that leather sofa, and went up to my suite. That afternoon, I called the resort's general manager. Robert, I need to make some changes to my stake here. We met in his office, an elegant room overlooking the gardens. I explained my situation, or at least enough for him to understand. He was discreet, professional, but I saw understanding in his eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, are you sure? This has been a very successful investment for you. I know, but I need a change. I need to separate myself from anything that ties me to this area, to this life. I signed the papers he had prepared. Sell my stake. Find another investor. Use the money to establish a trust for my grandchildren, accessible only when they turn 25. But neither David nor Fiona will have access to it. Robert nodded, taking notes. And your suite? Your privileges? They will end tomorrow when I check out. I won't be coming back here. I understand. He paused. If you'll permit me to say so, ma'am, I'm sorry for what happened in the lobby. The staff is appalled at how you were treated. It's not your fault, or the staff's. I stood up. Sometimes family is the most dangerous place to be. I returned to my suite and started packing. I didn't have much. I'd never been one to accumulate things. As I folded my clothes, my cell phone rang. It was David. I hesitated, but finally answered. Yes? Mom. His voice sounded broken. Fiona told me what you two talked about. Please, don't do this. Don't abandon us. I'm not abandoning you, David. You abandoned me years ago. I'm just officially acknowledging what was already a reality. That's not fair. I was an idiot. I admit it. But I'm your son. Your only son. I know. I closed my suitcase. And you will always be my son. But that doesn't mean I have to endure how you treat me. Love isn't enough when it comes wrapped in contempt. Give me a chance to show you I can change. Please. I sat on the bed, holding the phone to my ear. David, do you know how many times in these 15 years I waited for you to change? I waited for you to wake up one day and see what Fiona was doing to me. I waited for you to defend your mother, for you to choose to stand up for me even if it was uncomfortable. I paused. But you never did. Not once. I was blind. She manipulated me. No, David, don't blame it all on her. You saw what you wanted to see. You heard what you wanted to hear. Because it was easier to believe I was the problem than to face the fact that your wife was cruel. Silence on the other end. Then, in a barely audible voice, what do I do now? Live your life. Be better to your children than you were to me. And someday, when you're ready to be honest with yourself about all of this, maybe we can talk. When will that be? I don't know. Maybe never. I took a deep breath. But for now, I need distance. I need to heal. And I can't do that if I'm still waiting for you to change. I hung up before he could answer. That night, standing on my suite's balcony for the last time, I looked at the mountains under the moonlight. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I had waited so long for them to see me, to value me. And when they finally did, it was only because they discovered I had something they wanted. Tomorrow I would leave. I would leave this resort, this family, this life that was never really mine. And for the first time in 15 years, the idea of being alone didn't scare me. It filled me with a peace I didn't know was possible. The morning of my departure was gray, with low clouds covering the mountains. There was something fitting about it, as if the weather reflected the mood of the last few days. I finished packing early, leaving the suite immaculate, as if I'd never been there. I was in the lobby checking out when I saw him. David was sitting on one of the sofas near the entrance, looking as if he'd slept there. His clothes were the same as the day before, wrinkled and messy. He had deep circles under his eyes, and his hair was unkempt. When our eyes met, he stood up immediately. "Mom, wait." Robert, the manager who was processing my checkout, gave me a questioning look. I nodded slightly. He understood and discreetly stepped away. David approached, but kept a certain distance, as if he feared I might vanish if he got too close. "I know you said you needed space. I know, but I can't let you go like this." "I can't." "David." "No, please, just let me talk." He ran his hands over his face. "I was up all night, not just thinking, but remembering, really remembering." He took a shaky breath. "And you're right, Mom, about absolutely everything." A group of guests walked past us on their way to the restaurant. David lowered his voice, though the desperation in it was still clear. I remembered that Christmas, when Fiona said there was no room in the car. I didn't question it. I just took her word for it because it was easier than confronting her. His eyes filled with tears. "And your birthday? God, your 60th birthday." Fiona reminded me that morning. She said, "It's your mom's birthday today." And I said, "I'll call her later." But I didn't. I went to work. I got tied up in meetings. And when I got home, Fiona was planning her surprise party. And I forgot. "I know, David." "No, you don't know everything." His voice cracked. "Last night, after you spoke with Fiona, she told me everything. She told me things I had chosen not to see. How she talked to you when I wasn't around. How she made sure family invitations arrived late. How—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "How she actively kept you away from the kids because she didn't want you to have an influence on them." Embry. That hurt more than I expected. I had suspected, of course, but hearing it confirmed was different. "The kids asked about you," David continued, his voice trembling. "Especially Jake. He would ask, 'When is Grandma coming?' And Fiona always had an excuse. You were busy, you were sick, you had other plans, and I—" His face contorted in pain. "I was right there. I heard the lies, and I said nothing." "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because it was easier." The tears finally fell down his cheeks. "Because confronting Fiona meant admitting I had married someone capable of that cruelty. It meant admitting that I had failed you, and it was so much easier to believe her version. Where you were fine, where you didn't need us, where everything was justified." He sank onto the nearest sofa, covering his face with his hands. I remained standing, my suitcase by my side, watching my son fall apart. "There's something else," he said, his voice muffled by his hands. "Something I never told you." I waited. He lowered his hands slowly. His eyes were red, swollen. "When Dad died, before we started going through the paperwork, Fiona said something to me. She said I was the man of the family now, that I had to take care of you because you couldn't do it alone. That widows your age become dependent, needy. The air seemed to leave my lungs. And I believed her. I went into those meetings with you, expecting to find a lost, helpless woman. But you—" A sad smile crossed his face. "You knew exactly what to do. You had everything organized. You handled every paper, every call, every decision with clarity. And that bothered her. It bothered her that you didn't need us. And you?" He paused for a long time. I was ashamed. I realized I had underestimated my own mother, that I had believed that without Dad, you would fall apart. And when you didn't, when you showed you were perfectly capable, I didn't know how to process that. He shook his head. So I let Fiona create a new narrative. One where you were fine, but not so fine that you didn't need us. One where we could visit when it was convenient without feeling guilty. The silence between us was thick, heavy with years of unsaid truths. "David," I said finally, my voice softer than I expected. "Why are you telling me all of this now? Because I need you to know that I know exactly what I did. I can't hide behind I didn't realize anymore. I chose. Every time I ignored a call from you, every time I found an excuse not to visit, every time I allowed Fiona to treat you badly, I chose." He stood up, moving closer to me. "And I chose wrong. I chose my comfort over your well-being. I chose my marriage over my mother. And now?" I asked. "Now that you know I have money? Now that you realize there's an inheritance at stake? It's not about that." His voice was firm despite his tears. "Last night, before Fiona told me everything, before I processed anything about the money, I looked at old photos. I found one from my college graduation. Dad was there. You were there. And I remembered that day. I remembered how proud you looked, how you hugged me and told me I'd accomplished something incredible." He wiped the tears with the back of his hand. "And then I looked at more recent photos. Jake's elementary school graduation last year. Fiona was there. Her parents were there. My in-laws. But you weren't. And I realized we hadn't even invited you. We hadn't even thought of you." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "David, I let my son grow up without knowing his grandmother. I let Fiona turn my children into strangers to you. And it wasn't because of money I didn't know you had. It was because it was easier to keep you at a distance than to deal with the discomfort of including you." I wanted to comfort him. Part of me, the part that had been a mother for 37 years, wanted to hug him and tell him everything would be okay. But another part, the part that had suffered in silence for 15 years, held firm. "I appreciate your honesty," I said calmly. "I really do. But David, acknowledging your mistakes doesn't erase them." "I know." He nodded frantically. "I know, but it has to be a start. There has to be a way to fix this." "Fix it for what? For whom?" I looked him straight in the eye. "So you can feel better about your choices? So you can tell yourself you tried? So I can be a part of my kids' lives? So I can be your mother again?" "I never stopped being your mother, David. It was you who stopped being my son." The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were true. I saw them hit him, saw his face contract in pain. "Then tell me what to do," he begged. "Tell me how to fix 15 years of mistakes. Tell me how to get you back." "You can't." The words were simple, final. "There's no reset button for this, David. There's no series of apologies or gestures that will turn back time." "So what? You're just giving up on me? Writing me off like I wrote you off?" The accusation in his voice surprised me. "I'm not writing you off. I'm setting you free. Both of us." "I don't want to be set free. I want my mother." "Do you?" I asked gently. "Or do you want the idea of a mother, the woman who forgives everything, who is available when you need her, who disappears when you don't?" Because that woman doesn't exist anymore, David. She died yesterday in that lobby when your wife humiliated me and you laughed. I didn't laugh because it was funny. I laughed because I was nervous, because I didn't know what to do. You could have defended me. You could have stopped Fiona before things went that far. You could have done 1,000 different things. But you chose to laugh. I picked up my suitcase, and that laugh told me everything I needed to know. David blocked my path, desperate. "Please, Mom, not like this. Don't end it like this." "I'm not ending anything. You ended this years ago. I'm just officially acknowledging it. The kids need you. The kids have parents. They have grandparents on Fiona's side. They'll be fine." M. Pruding. "And me?" His voice broke completely. "Will I be okay?" I looked at him. This man who had been my baby, my little boy, my son. I saw the genuine pain in his eyes. I saw the regret. But I also saw years of damage that couldn't be erased with tears. "I don't know, David," I said honestly, "but that's not my responsibility anymore." I moved to step past him, but his voice stopped me one last time. "Is there anything I can do? Anything?" I half turned. "Yes, be better. Not with me. It's too late for that. But be better with your children. Teach them that people are not disposable. That family isn't just a word. And when they grow up and ask about their grandmother, tell them the truth. Tell them they had one, but you lost her." This time, when I walked towards the exit, He didn't stop me. The taxi was waiting. The driver took my suitcase and put it in the trunk. Before getting in, I looked back one last time. David was still in the lobby, motionless, watching me leave. I had imagined this moment in so many different ways. I thought I would feel triumph, vindication, even joy. But I only felt a deep emptiness. Not for what I was leaving behind, but for what I never truly had. I got into the taxi. To the airport, please. As we drove away from the resort, I didn't look back again. There was no reason to. That chapter of my life was over. 6 months later, I woke up in my new home to the sound of seagulls and the smell of salt in the air. The house I'd bought on the Northern California coast was modest compared to what I could afford, but it was perfect. 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen with an ocean view, a small garden where I'd planted herbs and wildflowers. It was mine, completely mine. I made coffee and went out to the deck with a blanket over my shoulders. The sunrise was painting the sky in oranges and pinks, and the waves crashed gently against the rocks below. This morning ritual had become sacred to me. It was the time where I just existed, without expectations, without disappointments, without the weight of being who others needed me to be. The first few months after leaving the resort had been strange. David called me 17 times in the first week. I let them all go to voicemail. I listened to every message, not because I wanted to reply, but because I needed to confirm my decision. Each call was the same: apologies, pleas, promises of change. But the words meant nothing anymore. Words had never been the problem. Eventually, the calls tapered off 1 a week, then 1 every 2 weeks. Now, I occasionally saw his number pop up, but I no longer felt the urge to answer. I had made peace with my decision. The sale of my stake in the resort had been finalized last month. Robert had kept me informed throughout the process. I asked him not to disclose my new address to anyone, and he respected my privacy. The money from the sale, almost $3 million, was divided according to my instructions. 2/3 went into a trust for my grandchildren, accessible when they turned 25. The remaining third I donated to support organizations for older women in situations of family abuse. It was ironic, but also fitting. My phone vibrated on the table next to my coffee. A text from an unknown number. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. "Beatrice, it's Margaret, Fiona's mother. I need to talk to you. It's important. Please." Margaret. I hadn't spoken to her since David and Fiona's wedding almost 16 years ago. I hesitated for several minutes before replying. "About what?" The reply was swift. "About my daughter. About what she did to you. Please, give me 5 minutes of your time." I should have said no. I should have blocked the number and continued with my peaceful morning. But something in her message, a desperation I recognized in myself, made me reply, "Call me." The phone rang seconds later. "Beatrice, thank you for answering." Margaret's voice sounded tired, older than I remembered. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what Fiona did." "No, you don't," I said simply. "I know, but I need you to know something. I need you to know that Fiona," she learned that behavior from me. She paused, and I heard her shaky breath. "I was a terrible mother-in-law, controlling, critical, always meddling in my son's marriage. And when they finally had enough of me, when they pushed me out of their lives, I became filled with bitterness." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "Fiona saw all of that. She saw how my meddling destroyed my relationship with my son. And when she married David, she swore she would never let her mother-in-law do the same thing, except," her voice broke, "except you were never like me. You never meddled. And yet, she treated you as if you had. Why are you telling me this, Margaret?" "Because 2 weeks ago, Fiona came to see me. It was the first time we'd spoken in months. And she said something that broke my heart. She said, 'I became you, Mom. I did exactly what I swore I would never do. I became you.' I closed my eyes, feeling a sadness I didn't expect. Not for Fiona, but for the cycle. For how damage repeats itself. One generation to the next. Margaret, I appreciate you calling, but this doesn't change anything." "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not calling to ask you to forgive Fiona. I'm calling because I need someone to know that I'm sorry. I planted the seeds of her behavior, And you paid the price. Not just me, I said softly. David did too. The children did. And Fiona herself. Yes. There was a long silence. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? Yes. I surprised myself by answering. Break the cycle with your other grandchildren. If Fiona lets you near them, be different. Be the grandmother I was never allowed to be. I heard a sob on the other end of the line. I will. I promise you. We hung up shortly after. I sat on my deck, watching the ocean, processing the conversation. Margaret was right about one thing. Fiona had learned her behavior, but she had also chosen to repeat it. And that choice? That was entirely her own. 2 weeks later, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting on the address. It was from David. Inside was a small box and a letter. I opened the letter first, my hands trembling slightly. Mom, I don't expect you to answer this. I don't expect you to read past the first line. But I need you to know a few things. Fiona and I are getting a divorce. Not because of you, though I know you were the catalyst for me finally seeing the truth. We're divorcing because we built a marriage on lies and manipulation. And neither of us can live like that anymore. The kids are confused. Jake asks about you constantly. Lily is too young to understand, but she feels the absence. I've been telling them about you, not the version Fiona created, but the truth. I tell them how you took care of me when I was a boy. How you sacrificed so much for Dad and me. How you were strong when the world expected you to crumble. And I've told them how I failed you. The box contains something of Dad's. I found it among his things when I finally forced myself to go through the last boxes. It's a journal he kept. He talks a lot about you in it, about how much he admired you, about how you were his favorite person in the world. There's one entry in particular that's bookmarked. It's from the day he died. He wrote it that morning, before his heart attack. It says, "If anything happens to me, I know Beatrice will be fine. She's the strongest person I know. But I hope David sees it too. I hope he takes care of her in the way she deserves, not in the way he thinks she needs." I read it and cried for 3 days straight. Because Dad knew you, he saw you, and I never did. I'm not sending this to get your forgiveness. I'm sending it because you deserve to know that Dad loved you exactly as you were, and that I, eventually, learned to see what he always saw. Be happy, Mom. Be everything you were never able to be when you were trying to be a part of our family. With love and eternal regret, David. I held the letter with trembling hands. Silent tears rolled down my cheeks as I opened the box. Inside was Richard's journal, worn leather, with page markers sticking out. I opened it to the page David had indicated. Richard's handwriting, familiar and missed, filled the page. I read his words about me, about our life together, about his faith in my strength, and at the end, that line about David, that hope that was never fulfilled. I closed the journal and held it to my chest, looking out at the ocean. Richard had known me. He had truly seen me, and in a way, that had to be enough. I put the journal on my nightstand, where I could see it every morning, but I didn't answer David's letter. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. He had done his processing, had come to his conclusions, and I was at peace with mine. The months continued to pass. Winter came, bringing storms that made the ocean roar. Spring followed, with wildflowers covering the cliffs. And slowly, I built a life that was entirely my own. I met other women in town, widows, divorcees, some who had never married. We formed a group that met on Thursdays for dinner to share stories. They weren't my blood family, but they felt more like family than the people I shared DNA with. One summer afternoon, I was in the garden when my phone rang. It was a local number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Mrs. Whitmore, this is Jennifer from the Harbor Cafe. You have a visitor asking for you. He says he's your grandson." My heart stopped. My grandson? Yes, a young boy, 9 or 10. He's with his father. They're asking if you can meet them here. Jake and David. Part of me wanted to say no. I wanted to protect the peace I had built. But another part, a smaller but insistent part, was curious. "Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes. End of chapter. I changed into more presentable clothes, brushed my hair, took a deep breath. The cafe was only a 10-minute walk from my house, but I took a longer route, needing time to prepare. When I arrived, I saw them immediately. David was at a table by the window, looking thin and tired. Next to him was Jake, now clearly 10 years old, with his father's dark hair and my eyes. Jake saw me first. He stood up immediately but didn't run to me. Instead, he waited, as if unsure of his reception. I approached slowly. David stood too, hands in his pockets, looking awkward. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "David." I nodded. Then I looked at Jake. "Hello, Jake." "Hi, Grandma." His voice was shy, uncertain. We sat down. A waitress came, and I ordered coffee for David and me, hot chocolate for Jake. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "Dad says we didn't see you for a long time because he made mistakes." I looked at David. He nodded slightly, encouraging me to answer. "Yes," I said carefully. "That's true. And he says you didn't want to see us because we hurt you. That's also true." Jake looked down at his hot chocolate. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't get to know you better." My chest tightened. "Jake, sweetie, none of this was your fault. None of it. Dad says you own hotels, and you're really smart. I was part owner of a resort. Not anymore." "Why not?" I glanced at David, then back to Jake. "Because I needed a fresh start." Jake nodded, as if he understood, though he probably didn't. He drank his hot chocolate in silence. David finally spoke. "I didn't come to ask for anything, Mom. I came because Jake deserves to know his grandmother, and because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I wanted you to see that I'm trying to be better, trying to teach Jake what I didn't learn until it was too late." "How did you find me?" "Robert." I begged him. I told him it wasn't for me. It was for Jake. He eventually gave me the name of the town. The rest was easy. It's a small town. I should have been angry with Robert for giving away my location, but I wasn't. "What do you want, David?" "Nothing." His voice was firm. "I don't want your forgiveness. I don't want your money. I just want Jake to have the chance to know you, if you're willing. It doesn't have to be much. Once a month or every other month. Whatever you can give." "Oh." I looked at Jake. The boy was watching me with cautious hope in his eyes. It wasn't his fault. It never had been. "Jake," I said softly, "would you like to come to my house sometime? I live right near the ocean. You could come over and we could walk on the beach." His face lit up. "Really?" I looked at David. "Once a month. You drop him off and you pick him up. You don't come in my house. We don't make family small talk. You just bring Jake." David nodded, his eyes shining. "Thank you, Mom." "Don't do it for you," I said firmly. "I'm doing it for him." And it was true. Jake deserved to know his grandmother. His grandmother deserved to have that connection, and I deserved the chance to be a grandmother on my own terms. The visit started the next month. David would bring Jake and leave him for 3 hours. Sometimes we walked on the beach, collecting shells. Other times, we baked cookies in my little kitchen. Slowly, Jake began to open up, to talk about school, his friends, his fears about his parents' divorce. He didn't talk about Fiona, and I didn't ask. It wasn't my place. David kept his word. He dropped Jake off and came back at the exact time. He didn't try to come in. He didn't push for deep conversations. Sometimes I would see him waiting in his car, and I would wonder what he was thinking. But it wasn't my concern. 6 months after that first visit, Jake and I were sitting on my deck, eating sandwiches, when he said, "Dad says you're the strongest person he knows." "Does he?" "Yeah. He says you were strong, even when nobody noticed. He says that's what being strong really means." I felt a lump in my throat. "Your dad is wiser than he used to be. He says he wishes he was like that sooner." Jake looked at me with serious eyes. "He says he lost you because of his own fault, and that it's the biggest mistake of his life." I didn't know what to say to that. Jake continued. "But he also says the best thing he can do now is make sure I don't make the same mistakes, that I know how to value people while they're still here." I looked out at the ocean, blinking back tears. Your dad is right about that. That evening, after David picked Jake up, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine. My phone was on the table beside me, and for the first time in nearly a year, I considered calling David. Not to forgive him, not to rebuild what was broken, but to tell him that I saw him trying, that I saw his efforts, even if they didn't change the past. But instead I sent a simple text. "Jake is a good kid, you're raising him well." The reply came minutes later. "Thanks, Mom, that means more than you know." I didn't reply. There was no need. The months turned into a year. Jake kept coming, and we slowly built our own relationship. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was honest. And it was on my terms. David never asked for more than I was willing to give. Lily, his younger daughter, was now 7, and sometimes came with Jake. She was shyer, more cautious, but sweet too. I told them stories about their grandfather Richard. I taught them how to cook recipes he loved. I showed them pictures of when David was a boy. We weren't a traditional family, but we were something, and that something was enough. One autumn afternoon, 2 years after leaving the resort, I was in my garden planting tulip bulbs when I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I looked up, expecting to see one of my friends from town. It was David, alone, without the kids. I stood up slowly, pulling off my gardening gloves. "It's not a visiting day." "I know." He stopped several feet away, respecting the space. I needed to tell you something." I waited, not inviting him closer. "Fiona got married again, to someone she met in therapy." He let out a bitter laugh. "Ironic, isn't it? But I didn't come to talk about her. I came because—" He took a deep breath. "Because I finally understood something. I understood that I don't need your forgiveness to move forward. That my job isn't to get you to forgive me, but to make sure Jake and Lily never have to ask for forgiveness for the same things." "And?" I asked, my voice neutral. "And I came to say thank you for letting Jake and Lily know you, for giving them what I threw away, and to tell you," his voice broke slightly, "to tell you that I finally understand what it means to be strong. It means knowing when to walk away. It means setting boundaries even when it hurts. It means choosing yourself when no one else will." The ocean wind blew between us, carrying the scent of salt and autumn flowers. "I lost you a long time ago," he continued, "and I spent years not accepting it. But I accept it now. You're not my mom in the way you used to be. You're Jake and Lily's grandmother. And that's more than I deserve." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. David nodded, as if he'd expected my silence. "I won't show up unannounced again. I promise. I just needed you to know that I finally get it." He turned to leave. But something in me, something small but persistent, made me speak. "David." He stopped but didn't turn around. "What you're teaching your children, about respect, about boundaries, about not taking people for granted." I paused. "Your father would be proud of that." I saw his shoulders tense, then shake slightly. He gave one sharp nod and kept walking without looking back. I stayed in my garden as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. I didn't feel triumph at my words. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt a kind of quiet closure. David would never be my son in the way he once was. That relationship died in the lobby of that resort, but he was learning to be a better father. And his children, my grandchildren, were learning lessons he learned far too late. That night, I sat on my deck with Richard's journal. I had been reading it bit by bit, savoring each entry like a precious gift. I came to a page near the end, dated just a week before his death. "Beatrice asked me today if I had any regrets. I told her no. But the truth is, I do regret one thing: not telling her more often how extraordinary she is. Not for what she does for me or for David, but for who she is. Strong when the world expects weakness. Gentle when the world offers cruelty. She is my favorite person, and I hope when I'm gone, she remembers that. I hope she finds a happiness that doesn't depend on sacrificing herself for others." I closed the journal, silent tears rolling down my cheeks. Richard had known me, had seen me completely, and had wished for exactly what I finally had: happiness on my own terms. I looked out at the ocean, dark under the night sky but lit by the moon. The waves kept crashing with their eternal rhythm, indifferent to human drama, to broken families, to hearts healed and hurt. My phone vibrated. A text from Jake. "Grandma," Dad says, "I can have a sleepover next month if you want. Do you? We could look at the stars from your deck." I smiled, typing my reply. "I'd love that, sweetie. Bring your sleeping bag." This was my life now. Not the one I had imagined as a young woman. Not the one I had hoped for when David was born. Not the one I had endured for 15 years of exclusion and pain. It was something entirely new. Something built on firm boundaries and earned respect. Something where I chose who entered my space and how. Something where my peace was the priority. I had lost a family, but I had gained something more valuable. I had gained myself. Years of waiting to be seen, to be valued, to be loved for who I was instead of what I could give, were over. I no longer waited for anything from anyone, and paradoxically, that had given me everything. The ocean roared softly in the distance. The stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. And I, Beatrice Whitmore, sitting on my little deck at my little house by the sea, was finally at peace. There was no dramatic reconciliation. No grand apology that healed decades of pain. No perfect ending where everyone learned their lesson and lived happily ever after. But there was this. A woman who had finally learned that walking away wasn't abandonment. It was survival. It was self-respect. It was love. The hardest kind of love of all. The self-love that says, "I deserve more than this." There was this. Grandchildren who would grow up knowing that people have limits and those limits must be respected. Who would learn that you can love someone from a distance. Who would see in their grandmother not a victim, but a woman who chose her own peace over the comfort of others. And there was this. Me, finally free from the weight of expectations that would never be met. Free from the need to be needed. Free from apologizing for existing. Freedom, I discovered, doesn't always arrive with a fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a house by the sea, on a deck under the stars. It arrives when you finally let go of what was never yours to hold. The responsibility for the happiness of others at the cost of your own. I took the last sip of my wine and looked toward the future. I didn't know what it would bring. Maybe Jake and Lily would keep visiting. Maybe the relationship with David would remain distant but respectful. Maybe someday, years from now, we might find something like forgiveness. Or maybe not. And that was okay too, because I had learned the most important lesson of all. I didn't need their closure to have my peace. I didn't need their regret to move on. I didn't need anything from them at all. All I needed was this. The sound of the ocean, the star-filled sky, and the absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. I had chosen myself. And that choice, that simple but revolutionary choice, had changed everything. The night deepened, and I sat for a little while longer, savoring the stillness, the solitude that no longer felt like abandonment, but like a sanctuary. Finally, when the ocean chill grew too strong, I went inside my house. I locked the door behind me, not to keep anything out, but to keep something in. My peace, my space, my life, rebuilt from the ground up. And for the first time in more years than I could count, I went to sleep without a weight on my chest, without unanswered questions, without hopes that would hurt me. Just the deep, quiet satisfaction of a woman who had finally found her way home, to her real home, to herself.